So let's talk about matrix inverse. As you know, the inverse function um, is something very common in math. So, for example, if you try, for example, to have sine of let's say 1.5, all right, there is always an inverse function that will give you the inverse value. A sine, for example, of that, all right, will give you 1.5. Will give you 1.5. Let me comment this first because we're gonna work on this in a second. Okay, all right. So let's run this. So the inverse of sine 1.5, a sine will give you 1.5. The same thing if you do, for example, the exponential of a number 3, let's say. Okay, it will give you a value. Okay, that's the value, but the log is the inverse of it. So it's log, it's the log, it will be its inverse. Okay, so we'll give you the third value. Okay, so it will inverse the operation, right? The multiplicative inverse, for example, of 2, for example. So what is the multiplicative inverse of 2? It's half. It's half. So if you multiply it by 0.5, okay, we'll give you 1, which is the identity. The multiplicative identity is 1. What is the additive inverse for 2? Additive inverse. So what is the value you add to 2 will give you the 0, which is the additive inverse, which is minus, for example, 2. And that will give you the 0. All right? And the question is, what is the inverse of a matrix? So let's try. Let me delete this now. Okay, we understand what is my inverse right now. Let's say that we have a matrix which is A, is like a squared matrix 3 by 3 using the magic. Okay, this is a matrix 3 by 3. So if you need to calculate the inverse, there's two ways of doing that. It's like A to the power minus 1 will give me the inverse. So this is the inverse of this matrix. The other way, there is a function, call it inverse, we call it inverse, okay, of matrix A. It will give you the same result. So as you see in here, this is the first way to calculating the inverse. Will give you the same result when you use the inverse or inv function. Bottom line, the inverse is if you multiply. Let me save this in, for example, in I. Let's save it in I. Okay, the inverse in I. Let me delete this for now. Okay, so if I multiply A, all right, if multiply A by its inverse, it will give me what? It will give me the identity matrix. So if I multiply it, I'm sorry, so if I go in here, A times the inverse, okay, it will give me the the identity matrix where you have 1 in the diagonal, where you have 1 in the diagonal. And also if I multiply I by its the inverse by the matrix will give me also the identity matrix, the same thing. So that is what is the inverse. That what is the inverse. All right, if I multiply the inverse by the matrix will give me the identity matrix. All right, so determining the inverse of a matrix by hand, it will be challenging. It will be very difficult, very challenging. I'm sure you have learned that in your math class or algebra class. However, there are matrices for which an inverse does not exist. Okay, not every matrix have an inverse, and these we call them singular. Okay, singular matrices, uh, singular matrices, singular matrices. We call them singular matrices, or sometimes we call them L, or we call them L uh, conditioned. Okay, matrices. Okay, either we call them singular or we call them L-conditioned matrices. L-conditioned matrices. So when you're trying to compute the inverse of L-conditioned matrix, error will give you error. Matlab will give you an error at the command window. So the matrix inverse is widely used in matrix algebra, although from a computational point of view, it is rarely the most efficient way to solve a problem. So it will be used a lot. So anyways, it's in Matlab, it's easy for us for any square matrix with one function. We could calculate the matrix. So if even if we make it like this, let's make it 10, which is a large matrix. If we try, so this is a large matrix. We could always calculate the. Let me remove this first, and let me remove these two, just to show it to you. So this is like a large matrix, 10 by 10, and it will automatically will calculate the inverse for that matrix. Of course, this is kind of impossible to do it by hand. It's impossible to do it by hand. It takes you forever.